In this country that is rooted to its androcentric culture, toxic masculinity is one of the things that will be frowned upon just by mentioning it. Boys crying, that would not be the words people would associate together here in Indonesia. But being a cis female my whole life, you could say that I lack of experiences and tribulations that opposite gender face. I'm here accompanied by Afif on Spill the Tea in honor to talk about how the youth in Indonesia is met with toxic masculinity. Hi Afif!
Hey, what's up?
Would you care to introduce yourself?
As Fina has introduced, I'm Afif. I'm a student at the University of Gajah Mada. I'm in economics and business studies.
Are you familiar with toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I'm educated on
Pretty
it.
much.
Pretty much, but I'm not saying that I'm the expert of it.
Well, by the definition of the Goodman Projects, toxic masculinity is the cultural ideal of manliness where strength is everything while emotions are weakness, where sex and brutality are yardsticks by which men are measured, while supposedly feminine traits are the means by which status as a man can be taken away from. Likewise, with this definition, certain topics could be put out of it. The most common phrases that are in line with toxic masculinity are boys will be boys and boys don't cry. With the idea that manliness measured by sex and brutality, this will be related to the rape culture. Is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, a couple of my friends in one of my friend groups have that kind of behavior where it's like, oh, boys will be boys, but when in truth it's not because he's a boy or a man or any other gender, it's because he's just him and his behavior, it just doesn't go in line with what a person should be.
Well, basically, rape culture is simply blaming the victims for the fault of the perpetrator. It basically sacrifice their freedom and suppress their rights to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most common thing that rape culture has been doing in this society that is most common is basically
When
like
one of your friend in a friend group makes a sexual remarks about a girl, about anyone, just by their body, that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree.
And sometimes people just brush things off. And people normalize that kind of behavior even though that's not necessarily normal. I mean, just by letting it happen means you're a part of that culture, right?
Well, if you know what the other person did, if you don't decide to do anything, you're not necessarily at fault at that time, but you could have done something to either prevent or to help the victim in the long run. Yeah. So it's an indirect fault
Of the friend group.
of the friend group. Yeah. To let that person be as he is.
Okay, now we're talking about the other end of the spectrum for toxic masculinity, like emotional vulnerability.
Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, that's the stereotypical expectation of masculinity for boys, right? Like to suppress their feelings and dismiss what makes them uncomfortable. Like the sayings that boys don't cry.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a fair trade?
Well, no, not really. Boys can cry. Either women, men, or any other gender, we all have the same right to do everything that we want. On this example, because of toxic masculinity, crying. Crying for boys is normal. I think what the society hopes from boys is that boys will keep it together more than girls do. But for boys to cry, it's okay. But to say that boys don't cry I think it's wrong because boys do cry. I sometimes cry, and that's okay.
Yeah, but that's part of the good thinking. That's not necessarily what the society thinks, right? Like, have you ever been told to man up by your friends while you cry, or told not to cry because that's not what boys do?
Yeah, once. My mother told me to not cry because it was kind of harsh. I don't want to get into too much detail. At that point in time, it was pretty saddening. At the time, I didn't know what else to do but cry. But my mom told me you have to keep it together, man up, and don't cry. See the word man up?
Yeah.
And that's
like there's a definition to be a man, right?
Yeah.
How would you define being a man be?
Well, in my opinion, being a man is being able to provide for yourself and your family, being able to keep it together at times that you are needed, but still remember that you're still a human and you have human traits, and
But not everybody thinks like that, right?
true.
how do you able to think that way? Because that's not necessarily what the society tells you to do. But see, it's interesting to see someone of a certain social sphere that was brought up by sayings that boys don't cry and boys will be boys and still have a good way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
See? Because the thing with Indonesian are, as I said before, the culture is deeply androcentric,
Mm-hmm.
which means that we tend to put boys before we put girls.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not always wrong for most cases, but sometimes that's just degrading both to women and to men. You think?
Define degrading to men.
Because we put a lot of expectations in men that we do not ask for in women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Like sometimes we neglect we neglect them as a human being, and I don't think that that's necessarily right.
Well, this comes back to, it's not about you being a certain gender. You could be a man, you could be a woman, you could be a helicopter if you wanted to. I don't really care.
Yeah.
But it just comes to you as a person. How are you going to do good so that you will receive good in this life?
Yeah.
Just try to be respectful to everyone, not just women, not just men, but to everyone. That's what being a man. From my experience, where I grew up, my ethnicity is Betawi, right?
Yeah.
And Betawi is very endocentric. It's endocentric.
Isn't that one of the culture that buys women
Yeah,
for marriage?
yeah.
Oh yeah.
First of all, from the culture, it buys women. Second, from the culture, it's like you're bidding for the women. Like a lot of
it's like a competition.
Yeah, it's like a competition from the culture of Palang Pintu. That's one of the examples. So growing up in Betawi culture, it's so endocentric that it's sickening sometimes.
Yeah.
And
You see things. You see the bad things and the good things in it, right?
Yeah, I see the bad things and the good things.
With the rooted culture here in Indonesia, it's really hard to tackle it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's. I don't think it's just in Indonesia. It's in a lot of countries.
Yeah,
too.
it's in a lot of countries.
Yeah.
But there has been a lot of development in this topic. A ripple effect, right?
Yeah,
it's
that's
not.
a ripple
It's not
effect,
an easy process, but it's still a process.
Yeah, ripples in the sea, or well,
in the lake.
or in the sea. You could like throw a rock in the sea, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, it's small.
We don't discriminate here.
We don't discriminate here. Sea,
here at Spill Podcast.
River.
Okay.
Well, I mean, ripples are small. They're definitely small. They're not big. If a ripple is big, it would create a tsunami, right? And tsunamis are not good for the people in land.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's called a revolution, though. If it's a big ripple, that's a revolution.
Yeah, and revolutions aren't always good.
Yeah. Do you think that we need revolution for this kind of stuff?
No, it's an evolution. You can predict it.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
So we need small but sure steps.
Yes.
Do you think?
And that is more effective.
Yeah, that is also more effective. There you have it, folks. Here at Spill Podcast, Spill the Tea Podcast.
What a weird name.
I'm sorry.